When you create a new MVC5 application that manages individual user accounts like we are, one of the NuGet packages that will be installed to the project automatically is microsoft.aspnet.identity.core. This is also the name of an assembly the project will reference once the package is added. And as the name implies, this assembly defines some core abstractions that are used by the identity features, including interface definitions for an iUser and an iRole. You can see a user only really needs an ID and a username. A role just needs an ID and a name, and that means you can uniquely identify users and roles, and they each have a friendly name throughout the identity system. Then there are the core abstractions for persisting user information. These are defined as interfaces with various different pieces of functionality factored out. So there's an iUser store. An object that is an iUser store has to be able to create a user, delete a user, and find a user by ID. There are separate interfaces for iUser password store and iUser login store. There are also interfaces defined for role storage, which I'm not showing here, but they have the same idea. It's basically a repository type design pattern where all the data access will be hidden behind these interface definitions. Notice that an iUser password store is an iUser store, so an object implementing that interface can not only create and find users, it can also get and set the user password with granular methods like get password hash and set password hash, and everything is async by default. There are also some concrete classes in this assembly, including the user manager and the role manager, which is not shown. I'm only showing the user manager. The user manager class takes an object that implements at least the iUser store interface. So user manager has access to an object that can store user information. If you give user manager an object that implements iUser password store, even better, because user manager can then manage users and their passwords. And it's the user manager that provides the domain logic for managing users. So the user manager will validate usernames and passwords. It'll make sure the passwords are hashed before going to the database. And all of this is extensible because you can plug in your own validator by setting a property on the user manager. That would be an object that implements iIdentityValidator. And you can define custom validators for identity, also even custom password hashers. But two things to remember here. It's the user manager API that you'll want to use inside an application to manage users. You don't use the store APIs like iUser store directly unless you're doing something low level, because user manager provides the domain logic to manage identities correctly and orchestrate these other components. Secondly, if you want complete control over the persistence of user information, you'll want to implement iUser store and iPassword store and those other repository type interfaces. Then you can pass custom stores into the user manager and it will orchestrate those for you. So for example, if you want information stored in RavenDB or MongoDB or XML files, then you'll need to implement iUser store and its associated interfaces and have those talk to different data sources. And in the application, when you construct a user manager, you can pass in your custom objects that talk to different databases. If you just want to use SQL Server, then these interfaces are already implemented. Let's take a look at that next.